Imagine that 11 years after being brutally raped and asked to participate in a flawed police lineup, you learn that the man that was convicted of the crime is actually innocent. Then imagine that 2 years later, you meet him, become friends, and join forces to help fight wrongful convictions. That's the story Jennifer Thompson tells in her New York Times bestseller, Picking Cotton, a Memoir, which she co-authored with Ronald Cotton, the man wrongfully convicted for that rape, and journalist Aaron Torneo. My name is Jeff M. Brown. I'm the legal writer with the State Bar of Wisconsin. I'm here today to talk with Jennifer about Picking Cotton, her memoir, wrongful convictions, and her appearance at the Forensic Justice Institute in January. In addition to being an author, Jennifer is an advocate who's lobbied state legislatures for changes to laws regarding police lineups and the compensation for persons who are wrongfully convicted. Her memoir, Picking Cotton, was published in 2010. A film of the book is currently in the works. Welcome, Jennifer. Thank you for talking with me today.
Thank you, Jeff.
What a coincidence that we're talking about wrongful convictions on the morning after it was reported that two men who were convicted of killing Malcolm X in 1966 will have their convictions thrown out. The New York Times, in reporting on that, wrote, "Their exoneration represents a remarkable acknowledgement of grave errors made in a case of towering importance." Your book, it seems to me, represents a similar acknowledgement, no less remarkable, I'd argue, about errors made in a case that began when you were raped. Can you talk a little bit about the genesis of the book? It must have been a big and soul-bearing project.
Yeah, anytime you sit down to write a memoir, you know that you're getting ready to go into some dark places, and you can't write memoirs or anything that is of biography unless you're willing to kind of like lay your soul bare and be really truthful and honest. And so it was very challenging. And it's not something I hadn't talked about in the past. I'd been doing work on wrongful convictions, eyewitness identification, the death penalty, any number of kind of criminal justice reforms for a long time. But the idea of doing a book was always there. I just wasn't sure when and how it would be done. I always kind of knew the structure of it. I even had the title of it. I just didn't know, how it was going to be birthed, so to speak. And actually, most of what I've done, from the advocacy work to the writing of the book to now my nonprofit, Healing Justice, where we work on aftercare and aftermath issues for everyone involved in these cases, has been very organic in nature. It's just kind of happened at the right time, at the right place. And it's just the idea of trusting the universe for me. And but it was hard because there were things that I had to talk about that I had never talked about, which is, naturally what happened that night to my body, what happened to me during those years in a very spiritual and emotional way, as it relates to my family and my children and the community. And then also the relationship that Ronald and I eventually navigated through to become friends.
For those who haven't read the book, talk a little bit about where the title comes from.
Well, the title came from, for me, I'm a big walker. I literally walk every day, 6 to 8 miles. It's my way of processing. It's cheaper than a therapist, better for you than a fifth of Jack Daniels. So that's how I process. And I was having this moment on a walk one day where I pictured almost like in a negative piece of film, where everything's the opposite, black and white. And I pictured cotton in the South, these rows of cotton being black, and then these white hands kind of coming down and picking the cotton. And in my head, I had this aha moment where I thought, oh my God, if we ever do this book, it has to be called Picking Cotton. And I remember running home and calling Ronald, and I was like, oh my God, I've got the title to the book if we ever write this book. And he's very, very laid back, and he said, okay. And I said, Picking Cotton. And he said, uh-huh. And I explained to him why I thought it was really important, because it is what happened. I did pick Ronald Cotton out of a lineup, but it also, I think, more holistically has us explore race in our criminal justice system, which we know is there, and we have to talk about it.
Right, right. What, if I may ask, what was the error in the lineup that led to the identification of Cotton? What was the specific flaw?
I mean, Jeff, there's so many things that take place between the moment that a person is incredibly traumatized, and your brain is being traumatized because you're being raped, you're being hurt, you feel like you're thinking you could die. So there's the trauma to the brain. And then going to the police station after the initial unspeakable trauma and the rape kit being collected, which is traumatic. You're asked within hours to begin giving descriptions of this person. And as you're telling the description, it's going into somebody else's brain and is being related into a composite sketch. And once that composite sketch was done and shown to me, it began to contaminate my memory at that moment, because I have an initial picture of the person who raped me, which was really good. I was very close in proximity and for a long period of time. But now it's being overlaid with this composite sketch. And when I'm shown that and asked, does this look like the person? My response was yes, because it did. It wasn't the person, but it did look like the person. And that goes into the newspaper, which leads to suspects. And the most critical phone call that came in was from a woman who said that the composite sketch looked like Ronald Cotton. And Ronald had some run-ins with the law, several, as a matter of fact. He had just been released out of jail in March. This happened in August. It was an attempted sexual assault. He's African-American. There was a white victim. There was a lot of weird things, right? But she also said she had seen him outside of my apartment at the exact time wearing the exact clothing that I had described. So the police put him in a lineup, in a photographic lineup. Now, Bobby Poole's not in the lineup. So I'm asked to look for 6 photographs. Ronald's photograph happened to have been taken a few years ago. And so therefore it looked more like the composite sketch than the day I'm asked to view a lineup. They had a recent photo, but he had thicker hair as opposed to close cropped hair. And when I'm looking at the photographs, he was the person who looked the most like my suspect, but more importantly, he looked the most like the composite sketch. So unbeknownst to me, in my mind, I'm actually comparing the photograph to my memory of the composite sketch as opposed to the photograph to my memory of the assailant. And when I picked him out of the photograph, I'm giving very, very strong confirmation. Good job, great job. That's who we thought it was. You got it. And that boosts my confidence like out the roof. And that was 3 days after the assault. He was held over he was arrested. And 7 days later, I was asked to come back to the police station and do a physical lineup where I'm now in front of 7 men. But the room that I was supposed to be in was being renovated. So I was taken to an abandoned school. And I'm in front of 7 men with a folding table in front of me. And the trauma from that was terrifying. So I've got all these traumatic moments, and now I'm in front of a physical lineup, and the only similar person that was in the photographic lineup is also in the physical lineup is Ronald. And naturally, your brain says, oh my God, I recognize that person. And it's, you're thinking from the trauma brain, from the brainstem, from the place where, your fear is based. And once I picked him out of the physical lineup, and again, was given confirmation, good job, that's who you picked out in the photograph. And now, within 10 days, my memory is completely, forever contaminated to the point where the original image of my assailant, who is Bobby Poole, is erased, and there's a new image in front of my brain, and that's all I can see. And it's what human beings do. It's not anything intentional. It's people who are trying to do the right thing. And that's what made the lineup flawed.
Well, that's, and thank you for sharing all that at such length and with such vulnerability, Jennifer. It's a fascinating mix of neuroscience and memory and visual representation that composite sketch seemed to take on a life of its own, a bit of a cliche, but and you talked about the original visual image of the person who actually did this was almost as if it were erased or certainly supplanted by what came out of that composite sketch and the photographs and everything. And
absolutely, even to the point where 3 years later, when there was a second trial, because the appellate court overturned decision and called for a new trial, and they brought Bobby Poole into the courtroom because he was now in the same prison as Ronald, and there had been a cellmate saying he had confessed, and when they brought him into the courtroom in 1987, and there was nothing, no memory at all, not at all.
And that is not through some sort of drug or brainwashing. It is literally the result of this unfortunate confluence of circumstances that you described. Wow.
That's right. And we all do it, and we've all done it in our lives. Someone tells you that you got lost when you were 2 years old, walking through the grocery store wearing, a striped shirt, and you swear you can see it. It's because someone's told you that enough times that you've created the memory of it. It happens all the time.
I was told by my mother, to your point, that I fell down the stairs when I was 1 or 2 years old. I got over that gate that people with children have, and there's almost certainly I have no memory of that. But as you say, because I've been told it by my mother, I've built up the memory. I can feel my head hitting each stair as it goes down. I can feel myself landing, and there being a moment just before you start to scream when I see my mother come out on the landing, and almost certainly know that that's true. But as you say, I've constructed that in my memory, right?
And we create memories all the time.
Yeah. Wow. I'm wondering, did the lobbying and advocacy work come before or after the book?
Oh, it came before the book. Ronald came out in 95. We became friends in 97. The world found out about it in 97. We were very quickly kind of propelled into this weird world of People magazine in 2020. And because I had been the first survivor to speak out about what had happened to me, not just the crime of what happened to me, but what happened for those 11 years. Everybody wanted to hear my story, and they did. I mean, I was taken everywhere across, the United States, across Canada, just everywhere. And what unfortunately ended up happening for me, and I'm unpacking it still today, is that the world assigned the blame for what happened to Ron on me. I didn't have the words to push back. And so that world created unbelievable harm to me that I probably will never get over. The blame, the death threats, those types of things. I'll never get over those things. But it also created this very strange singular narrative about the story, which was that Ronald Cotton was the only person hurt. And my trauma and my harm got erased out of the story to the point where my trauma and harm wasn't even considered. So I would stand on stages, literally thousands of them, and people would say, oh my God, Ronald Cotton is the most amazing man to forgive you for what you did to him. And I would sit there and think, but I didn't do anything. I was trying to survive, and I was trying to do the right thing. Bobby Poole did terrible things to both of us. Bobby Poole raped me and tried to kill me, raped a second woman and beat her, and then sat back and watched an innocent man get arrested for the crimes that he committed. And no one talked about that. And so the advocacy for me began very early, and is still ongoing. I'll always advocate for healing and restorative justice and fixing the failures in our system, but I do it now in a very different way, which is trying to create equity in the narratives of everybody who gets impacted by these system failures.
Well, and that was going to be my next question, and I don't need to ask it because you went into it so deeply there. The consequences of wrongful conviction for the person convicted are obvious, but much less obvious, and as you've mentioned, much less discussed or even thought about are the consequences of the victim. And secondly, a point we made earlier, the person who raped you not only victimized you, also victimized Ronald Khan. And
that's right. And was left to be free on the streets for another 9 months, and he committed 24 other violent crimes.
Wow.
6 of which were first-degree rapes. And so at Healing Justice, one of the things we talk about is these concentric circles of harm that happen. And what we're not doing is putting the perpetrator in the center of those concentric circles. So the perpetrator begins this initial movement of violence and harm and pain and suffering by hurting a victim or, victim's family members. And then, of course, the innocent man and woman, and then their family. But we also have to be very clear that there's many other people impacted by these system failures. Jurors get hurt. Police and prosecutors get hurt, public defenders and the defense attorneys get hurt, the judges get hurt, and the community gets hurt. Because if we're not getting the right person, then we're leaving the wrong person out on the street. And it's the way I talk about it, and I believe it's the correct way of talking about it, it's wrongful liberty. And we're not talking about it in that kind of direction. We've kind of created these little silos of narratives, and I'm a huge proponent of really understanding the great swath of harm that gets created.
Well, it is. I mean, you use the metaphor of the ripples going out, and that's typically associated with someone dropping a pebble into a pond. Well, with a violent crime, it's more like somebody hurling a stone into a pond. But you're right. It's the perpetrator who did that, and I love the metaphor of the swath too, because it is like somebody with a scythe just coming and
it is. I've done several presentations about wrongful convictions should be talked about from a butterfly effect, right? Like here's this initial movement of the wings, but 5 years later, there's a tsunami happening in China. And like, we really do need to be talking about it from this angle for a lot of reasons. One is because currently and historically, wrongful convictions have been, John got hurt, and the world's like, oh, it's terrible, John got hurt. And so when we go for policies and legislation, it tends to be, okay, well, 1,000 people have been wrongfully convicted, 2,000 people have been wrongfully convicted. And it's terrible and it's awful, but it's really not that big of a number. But I'm of the opinion that for every single wrongful conviction, there's at least 100 people hurt. And I mean, hurt forever.
There's a multiplier.
Yeah. Absolutely. And so that's more of a truthful story and a narrative. And that's how I like to talk about it. And that's what we talk about at Healing Justice, and why we do the work of what we call all harmed, all healed.
I once read a very literary analysis of murder mysteries, right? Novels. And someone said they're analogous, someone who was a scholar and studied literature, said that they're analogous to what they fulfill the same function that dragon stories did in medieval times, right? And there weren't really dragons in medieval times, but those stories persisted. And they were really stories about some awful evil force has come in from out of nowhere and has burned the village and killed villagers. And here comes the knight to slay the dragon and restore order to the world, right? And that's what a murder mystery is about. Some horrible thing has happened. There's this gap in meaning in our little universe. And now the detective needs to come in and solve the case and fulfill the role of the dragon slaying knight and set the world to rights again. And in the case of a wrongful conviction, that's even worse than, in some sense, than not solving it, because you actually think the dragon has been slayed, but it hasn't. To your point about the perpetrator pool still being out to commit all those crimes, that the system said the dragon has been slain, everything's fine, and when in fact it hadn't been.
Right. And Jeff, to the point of that, that's just the cases that we know who the guilty person is. I mean, the vast majority of these cases will never be solved, which means the person's still out there, or in many of our cases, the statute of limitations wore off in rape cases. So now here's this person whose life has been forever altered. Her life is never going to be the same. And there's this innocent person whose life is never going to be the same. And we know who it is, and we can't hold them accountable. And what does that say to all these people who got harmed? And it's a unique harm, unlike really most harms that we deal with, because they're long lasting, they're complex, they're very complicated. They've got layers and layers and layers and layers of harm. And one of the things that we, noticed when we started this project was the day of the exoneration is like the dreams come true for the wrongfully convicted man and woman and their parents and their families, and they're all standing up there and they've got their fists raised and they're like, you're free. What are you going to eat first? What are you going to do? And everybody's happy, right? But for the crime survivors over here, it is just another continuation of unimaginable trauma, because now it's going to go into a cold case file. And to quote one of our murder victim family members we work with, who's now an elderly man, and he looks at me with tears. He says, I'm going to go to my deathbed and never know who killed my child. I'm never going to know that. And so, again, it's when we really start talking about, the dragon slayers or the knight in shining armor or the detective that comes in that saves the day. At the end of the book, it's all cleaned up and tidy, but that's not the case in wrongful convictions. It's just not that clean and tidy. And we know that the lives that were impacted and the lives that were destroyed, we're being asked now to carry those things that we can't change.
Yeah, that's difficult to say the least. Tell me a little bit about the Healing Justice Project. What's that about?
So I started Healing Justice 6 years ago because I had been out there doing this work with many, many people. What I was seeing was that there was, once exoneration, took place or the conviction was overturned, there was nothing in this aftercare space. People were just like, good luck, go home, have a great life, move forward. And it sounds good. And for the first 6 months, it kind of works. But after the next 6 months, people are kind of sitting there thinking, well, now what do? I've lost 23 years of my life. And their mothers are saying, you need to get a job, or you need to stop crying, or you need to come out of your room. And this person has been traumatized every day for 23 years. And so that's, what do we do now, was that this big gap for crime victims and survivors like myself. As I said, we are now erased out of the story. So what happened to us or our loved ones is no longer even part of the story. Or if it is part of the story, the person's loved one is narrated in the story of, Black drug addicted prostitute. So we're either blamed for causing the wrongful conviction or blamed because our bodies weren't valuable enough, and so therefore we caused our own death or our own rape. And I was sitting with these people. I was sitting with the mothers and the children and the exonerees, and the crime survivors were calling me in tears, like literally on the verge of killing themselves. And I kept thinking, like, for Ron and I, we applied what would be called restorative justice in our lives. We didn't know it, by the way. We were just doing it. But I knew that there had to be a space for restorative justice to be used in the wrongful conviction world. Was it possible to bring together these deeply impacted people, crime survivors, family members, exonerees, family members, into safe spaces where they can listen to each other's stories and validate the harm that was caused to each other, and begin to unpack their own harms and be able to heal not just themselves, but each other. And so I started this project 6 years ago with this understanding of, we can apply restorative justice in these cases. And what has come out of that is, and I use this word and it's weird because it's really simplistic, but what happens in these safe spaces, which we do, which we call healing justice retreats, is magical. I mean, it's literally magical. And what the magic is being able to bring people together in communities that have shared harms to connect with one another. So they're not living out here locked into their rooms or crying in their cars, into a community that's safe so they can show up and be brave and be vulnerable and talk about the worst moments. And the worst moments weren't necessarily the day they were arrested or, you know, the day that their appeal got turned down. It's the day that someone called. It's the day that someone calls up and says, when we would bring these folks together, it created communities where people felt like they belonged. And belonging is the critical component to healing. Without the belonging, the healing is really, really difficult and challenging. And we've seen amazing things happen through healing justice. So we do restorative justice retreats, but we also do technical training and assistance to prosecutors' offices, conviction review units, conviction integrity units, innocence projects, on training on victim notification and how important that is so that we don't continue re-traumatizing family members and crime survivors over and over again when these convictions are now overturned. We've worked with people who didn't even know for 10 years that the person they thought had killed their father had been exonerated. No one bothered to tell them. No one bothered to call them.
What's the that's really powerful. I mean, amazing work and heavy work too. I imagine trauma work and grief work. What's the reaction? I asked this to the person I was interviewing yesterday, who'll be at the institute, who trains law enforcement on interrogation techniques. How receptive is law enforcement to the type of outreach that you do with the project? Is that something they want to learn to get better at this? Is there any reticence? What's it been like?
Are you referring to the victim notification piece?
Right, and just the interaction the project's had with law enforcement.
Mm-hmm. So most of our work currently is out of CRUs and CIUs, victim advocacy offices, prosecutors' offices. But I will tell you, we have done some work with investigators and police, and this might shock you, but one of the things we hear over and over again from many, many offices is, oh, I forgot about the victim. Which goes to my point of the victims being erased out of the stories and the narratives. People forgot about me. People forget about us. We're no longer relevant. And so it's been a new, it's been new on the horizon. It's very new. This work in the post-conviction setting. For me, the hardest thing was hearing that of, oh, forgot about the victims. I guess I should call them. Gosh, nobody's kept up with them for 15 years. Don't know how to find them. And to me, that really hurts my heart. You know, it hurts my heart when, particularly when you sit with victims and you hear their stories of, you know, a brother being shot execution style the day he was going to teach his sister how to drive. And, you know, she'll tell you that if you look at this case, if you go in and look at this case and Google it, there's no mention about her brother at all. No one's even remembered him.
Wow. Are you looking forward to the panel discussion at the
Yeah.
You know, have there been topics selected, or do you know where it's kind of going to go? Or
I think our topic is that idea of the concentric circles.
Okay.
This idea of this much larger number of people that get hurt, and we need to talk about those things.
Great. When is the film of the book coming out?
Good question, Jeff. I'd like to know the answer to that too. It's, these things are always weird, and I try not to get too wedded to it, because again, I go back to the first thing I said to you, which was trusting the universe. Like, I really have this thing in me where I trust the universe that it's going to bring me what I need when I need it. And if I don't need it, and if it's not good for me, the universe is going to say, yeah, nah, we're going to put that over here. So if it's supposed to happen, it'll happen. They have selected the actors to play Ron and I, which I can't tell you.
Who's playing you? That was my next question.
Yeah, see, I can't tell you that. I've been sworn to, like, yeah, I've been sworn to lightning bolts coming through the ceiling to, like, strike me dead.
Did you have any input into who would play you?
No, I don't. I did have some input on the screenplay. So, but my work with Healing Justice is really what I love to do, and it's what I will continue doing. And hopefully, whatever good things are supposed to happen will come my way.
Okay, great. Well, I look forward to hearing maybe a little bit more about the film and meeting you and hearing more about the amazing work that your project does and your journey. And I'm sure I'm sure our attendees will as well. Again, the Forensic Justice Institute, January 20 and 21. Jennifer Thompson, thank you for your time today.
Yeah, I'll see you there.
Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, bye.